So my guest tonight, Peter, has worked for many years as a clinical psychologist in England and Scotland. His interest in anomalous phenomena goes back to his teens, actually, probably even earlier. And his PhD thesis at the University of Glasgow was based on the research into the nature of hypnosis. Very interesting subject. He's currently a member of the Society of Psychical Research, which is SPR, which is very well known, and ASAP, the Association for the Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena. It's a mouthful, ASAP. But again, it's another well-established organization which study all sorts of things. And when you say anomalous phenomena, it kind of covers a lot of things in the paranormal aspect, supernatural aspect, even some of the ufological aspects, believe it or not. Peters wrote a number of very interesting books. Zone of Strangeness and Examination of Paranormal and UFO Hotspots, Paranormal Encounters on Britain's Roads, Phantom Figures, UFOs and Missing Time, which is one of my favourites, because I've actually got it here. And Britain's Paranormal Forest, Encounters in the Woods, Curses, Coincidences, and Malign Influences, a parapsychological perspective. Peter, thank you for coming on tonight. Very nice to meet you again. And it has been a while since we were in Scotland together, isn't it?
Yes, yes, we bumped into each other at a conference.
Yeah, it was certainly fun. Now, Peter, you've wrote some interesting books, and as you know, I've actually got Paranormal Encounters in Britain, and that's a resource book as far as I'm concerned, because I can go to those locations. You can scout around the UK, you can read the book, and you can go to actually those locations and basically sit there and see if you can experience anything. Talk to people, locals, if they've experienced things. Did you have to do quite a bit of traveling to do that particular book? I mean, you mentioned these different locations.
It was based on inquiries and perhaps traveling over some years. Yes,
Right. And
yeah,
that obviously covers quite a large amount of areas. People who
yes.
the strange paranormal instances. Did you get into obviously the hitchhiker phenomenon, road hitchhikers?
Yes, there's a chapter on that. Yes.
And there's quite a number of reports that have taken place in the UK. There's many of them throughout the US of those type of incidents do take place.
Can I just, sorry to interrupt, but I've used the hitchhiker term broadly as it tends to be used in the paranormal literature. Literally, one would interpret a hitchhiker as someone standing by the roadside thumbing a lift. But
Yes.
people have used the term more broadly for experiences in which, for instance, someone is driving along in their car in a certain area, and then they suddenly look to their left and they see a figure beside them in the car or in the back seat. And the term phantom hitchhiker has been applied to these people, even though they may not necessarily have solicited a lift.
Mm. Of course, I have come across terminology of hitchhiker as well within the paranormal circles, such as people who claim that they brought paranormal phenomena back home with them. Uh,
Yeah, this is one that puzzles me. This is an Americanism. I just prefer the term contagion.
that's a
Uh,
lot better.
it's a lot clearer. It's got the clear analogy with an illness or something like that. You go into a meeting, someone got got the COVID, and you pick it up. So there's contagion. But this so-called hitchhiker effect that the Americans use, I'm not. It doesn't. It's not a good analogy in my opinion.
No, it's a bit confusing, the terminology.
Yes,
And this is one of the biggest problems we have within the subject is the terminology.
yes,
People, I mean, I've read a number of books they've made their own terminology up. So it gets very difficult, as you can imagine, because all
yes.
these different places have all their own different names that, they derive. And it causes a little bit of confusion. The phantom hitchhiker phenomena, should we say? Yes, reports in the UK and other places around the world, but some of them are apparently associated to where people apparently perished at that particular place or roadside, and apparently some unknown. Actually, sometimes we don't know who they were, and apparently nothing was reported in that particular location. So we've got a number of reports of interesting cases where truck drivers have managed to pick up people and conversed with them, and then they've suddenly just vanished. So it's a fascinating part of that phenomenon is that they are seemingly just like you and me, physical, and then suddenly just disappear, hence the name Phantom, you know. And of course, there are lots of other reports around the world of similar incidents. So it's not just the UK, it goes all reports all over the world and associated with haunted roads as well. I mean, I've visited a number of them in Wales. One of them was in Wales, which was a phantom coach, because you actually see the whole thing, the horse, the coach, the whole thing. It's apparently just comes through a small village in Wales where a number of people have seen it occasionally. It doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it's always seemed to be the same. There's no difference. Now, many years ago, Peter, people referred to the paranormal, such as, we see because things are said to have a soul, even animals to some degree, that this is why we see them, because they were once a living thing. But the problematics of is that we also see things which is inanimate, such as, cars and trains and boats and coaches, so it's not something directly associated with something that was once living. It seems to be more of an event. Would you agree with that?
Well, yes. I mean, in a recent talk to ASAP, I argued that we should bin the expression ghost because it's ambiguous. It implies a spirit, which may or may not be the case, and it's unnecessary because we could simply refer to these so-called ghosts as apparitions. And as you correctly say, there are cases of inanimate objects, such as cars appearing in apparitional form. Someone's driving along a road, they maybe come up to a humpback bridge. They see on the way, they see a vehicle ahead coming towards them. It's obscured by the bridge as they get close, and then they're surprised, or it might be the driver plus one or more passengers. They're surprised to see nothing there when they see the road, and maybe there are no turn-offs where the thing could have gone. And this is an inanimate object that's being seen. So I think the term apparition is much more neutral. It doesn't presuppose a spirit. The other problem with the word ghost is that even among people who maybe do believe in that the ghosts are representations of spirits, some people would use the word ghost just for any apparition that's living, any kind of an animate form, whereas others would be more selective and would use it for a recurrent apparition. So in other words, if I see driving along a road somewhere, a figure, and it's not been seen before, I might describe it as a ghost. Other people might only describe it as a ghost if it's something that pops up now and again. So I agree with you. Yes.
Can be, of course. I mean, they've got many countries that have their own experiences of the paranormal phenomena, and of course their own terminology. And there is a mix-up sometimes in regarding the ghost, apparitional, specters, all those sort of different names for many different things. But of course, it seems to be able to encompass all. In the same book, you also covered UFOs and missing time.
Yes.
Now, what specific locations did you look at for the UFO phenomena? I mean, of course, we've got some very well-known cases in the UK, but it isn't as widespread, should we say, such as like the US, the UK, because the US is everything. It's just everything. There's so much interest in the subject. It's everywhere. But in the UK, we're a little bit more, selective in regarding what we might say is a significant UFO incident. Which ones did you actually cover in the book, Peter?
The reports I covered were fairly wide ranging geographically, from Scotland down to southern England, I think it was, and there are reports probably from all parts, really,
Yes.
of this phenomenon.
We had a very interesting case in Scotland called the A70 incident.
Yes, that's one that I mentioned. Yes,
it is, I believe, probably the only one I know of where the Ministry of Defence in the UK had an interest in that particular investigation. Incident. They made that quite public that they were interested in what happened. Now, it's an unusual location. It's remote.
It's relatively. It's not too far from Edinburgh.
That's right.
It's southwest of Edinburgh, roughly. Um, it's a fairly quiet road beside a lake, a loch, as they call them in Scotland, um, and it's a fairly quiet road. And a couple of chaps were driving to a village called Tarbrax, I think it's called, and they saw an object flying well in the air, and the driver swerved, and then I think it's when I'm just talking
Yeah.
without my notes, so I can get
Well,
things wrong. But the gist is that they saw something. I think the driver swerved to avoid it. They blacked out temporarily, came to, arrived at their destination, and they were a lot later than they thought they should have been.
exactly.
And the exact period of missing time is slightly in dispute, I think, from a couple of the sources I looked at, but it was significant. And then they were persuaded to undergo hypnotic regression and volunteer to do that, and they allegedly each had memories of some kind of abduction experience. Their reports weren't completely concordant, but the and whether or not you believe that the hypnosis can elicit genuine reports, the fact is that they did seem to experience this missing time element.
Yes. Yeah, the missing time element is fascinating
Yes,
me because that's some form of, something had happened to them.
yes.
And it's interesting when it's more than one person that's involved. Now, being a clinical psychologist, how do you what are your views in regarding the use of hypnosis for obtaining accurate information? Is it that good to be able to precisely?
It's got a bad press in the sense that I think there has been research evidence suggesting that hypnotically recalled memories aren't necessarily correct. And a problem with hypnosis is that maybe um, even though a person might recall something that isn't historically correct, that they through maybe suggestion or imagination, so they may come to believe with a higher degree of confidence than is justified that the memory is real. On the other hand, from the clinical literature, and not the psychical research, but clinical, there do seem to be reports suggesting that hypnosis may help to uncover maybe sort of suppressed experiences and so on. So I don't know. To be honest, I haven't been involved in the hypnosis field for many years now. My
Yes.
PhD work was back in the 80s, and I did use hypnosis a bit in my work. Um, as a clinical psychologist, but I haven't been involved with the field for many years now. So I don't know what the current standing is on this.
I think it does have some benefits, I think, but it also can muddy the water, I think, and in some cases. So it's very difficult how we actually deal with that. Um, and some of the research that was carried out in the US suggested that in some cases there seemed to have been what is referred to as a programmed memory, that their recollection was different than what they recalled under hypnosis. And so that argument's been put forward occasionally. But when I was with a number of organizations and around about probably the latter 90s, they started to, in the UK, to rule in this no hypnosis policy because it did come under a bit of a bad rap because they were saying that, well, it's fruitless at obtaining the truth, and it's all down to interpretation. However, there is, like you say, I think there are some benefits to this. I mean, I don't, the police authorities apparently still utilize the process of hypnosis when they're trying to have somebody remember
I
something.
don't know whether legally whether hypnotically elicited testimony is
I don't think
admissible. Is
no,
it
I
in
don't
court?
think it's legally
Yes.
permitted, but it is utilized to help the individuals to remember, say, a car registration or things like that. Something usually mundane. It's to help them trigger a real sense of the memory that they had. Because of course, it's hard to recall, but It does have it. I see it kind of it's a seesaw effect. It has good things, it has some bad things. But it is utilized by many other researchers. So some researchers in the US have been utilizing the process of hypnosis for many, many years. And I have to say some of it is questionable, but there is good things about it as well. In regarding the UFO phenomena in the UK, did you ever actually get around to, the UFOs that are seen around coasts or in the oceans, lakes, the sea, things like that? Because there are a number of people that do report seeing them entering water.
That's right. USOs, unidentified submersible objects, or yes, or yes. And in fact, the new term, unidentified anomalous phenomena, is a broader category because it can encompass
Yeah,
cases of that kind as well as things flying through the air.
it does.
Um,
It does. I mean, a UAP, which is a common term now, which is being utilized. I mean, I first came across that in my studies of meteorology. Everything was UAP back then,
yes.
in those studies. But it encompasses so much more. And of course, I mean, the UFO could be anything. It could be misidentified, of course, which does happen. But then, of course, there are lots of other things that could be misidentified as UFOs, meteorological phenomena, astronomical phenomena. So it doesn't, you are right, it does encompass it all. But a lot of people are saying that because of the new terminology, that it's an attempt to try and brush away the 80 years of previous research into the subject of UFOs and, kind of take it in a slightly new narrative direction. And there's a lot of people talking about that. And they was basically saying that the new narratives that have been put forward, because there's been a lot of congressional hearings and things taking place in the US, and we heard a lot of referencing to UAP and interdimensional. And what we didn't hear much of was extraterrestrial and extraterrestrial hypothesis. So it does seem that maybe there is a slight new shift or new narrative which we're leaning to in regarding interdimensional. Do you think these are interdimensional, Peter, or do you think that they are traveling the vast distances of space to come to planet Earth?
I suppose, to be fair, the question you're asking presupposes one explanation. It could be all, there could be different cases which fit either thing. The problem I have with the way people use the word dimension, generally in the sort of field of anomalous phenomena, is I don't know sometimes whether they're using the word metaphorically or whether they're using it literally. For instance, if someone talks about it came from a parallel dimension,
Mm.
that to me is meaningless because it's something that's parallel, it's part of the same dimension.
Yes.
In a literal sense, yes.
Yes.
So if someone talks about a parallel dimension, I think what they're probably meaning is a parallel universe or a parallel world or something, which presumably has more than one dimension.
Yeah.
I mean, if there are two Steve Meras in parallel worlds, that they're not just length, width, height. They presumably exist in all of those.
Exactly.
um,
Yeah. It's another, again, terminology is
yes.
confusing. I
It's
think,
interesting, though. Sorry to interrupt, but with the word, the abbreviation UFO, originally it was introduced by the United States Air Force, and it was a neutral term, unidentified flying object, or something that couldn't be identified. It didn't mean flying saucer or didn't
no.
mean spaceship. But the trouble was, eventually, people started to equate UFO with flying with a spaceship, an extraterrestrial or other dimensional entity. And they would say things like, I'm sure of what I saw, and I think it must have been a UFO. Well, even if it had been an unidentified satellite, that would have been legitimately a UFO. But So people have now gone on to this UAP thing, but I could imagine the same thing happening there, in 20 years, maybe, because of, people will have to abandon UAP because people will equate that with a spaceship, so we'll have to have another term.
It'll continue until there's something. I mean, it'll just continue on. People will make these references and look up
Yes.
these things. Flying saucers was a thing for the 1950s, of course,
Yeah.
UFO
Do
phenomena.
you know, it's interesting with this flying saucer business because I think that there's a myth around that the modern era of flying saucers or UFOs began in 1947, and yet you can go back long before then, and it's a completely arbitrary date in a sense. I mean, there were cases before then, so I think saying it, making some arbitrary starting point is irrational.
It is. I mean,
Yeah.
we could track back, and if we want to take, I mean, it's difficult because you're dealing with, ancient cultures and what their beliefs are and what they might have called things or represented them to be. But what there does seem to be on a worldwide basis is something of a similarity and associated with something from the sky, an intelligence that they communicate with, objects. So sky gods. That's an interesting thing because it was such a widespread belief throughout so many cultures. So if we are talking about a phenomena, which is like the phenomena we witness today, and trying to put a finger on it to say how old is this phenomena? Well, it could predate history. Obviously, we wouldn't know. I mean, it might have been taking place before we were even documenting these
Yes.
types of phenomena. So it could be going on such a long time because what in the 1950s they had the theory that we attracted these things from other planets because of our nuclear activities. Exploding nuclear weapons at high atmosphere and doing tests and things caught their eye. But it does precede that. There are some very interesting documented cases long before the 1940s testing of these nuclear weapons. So that's very interesting. Do you think it has any paranormal connections with with the terminology of what we would think the paranormal is? Do you think the ufological stuff has part of that?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a really big overlap, and I think that well, I say I think I'm pretty convinced of this that some people like to put these things in different boxes. They have a kind of I commented recently in an article that in one of my books, I saw a review. People say you shouldn't read reviews of your own books, and that's probably a good idea because you're always going to get nasty things or unpleasant things or disappointing things. But a woman reviewing the book said, I would have given it 4 stars, but I'm much more interested in ghosts or something and cryptids and so on rather than UFOs. And for me, there was a bit too much UFOing going on, and it was as if this woman, didn't like too much UFO stuff, and yet when you've got to, if you're trying to report honestly, and if you go to an area that's supposedly a paranormal hotspot and all sorts of things are going on, including UFO sightings, not to report the UFO sightings or UAP sightings would be dishonest reporting. And if there is this correlation, maybe the phenomena are linked. I mean, one of the views I have is that um, when people see objects in the sky, UAPs or UFOs, which aren't readily explicable in ordinary physical terms, they could be as apparitional as phantom cars. They may
Yeah.
have no permanent existence. They could be creations of the moment, orchestrations by maybe a higher intelligence for theatrical purposes, just as apparitions could be. And also, looking at case reports, there's considerable overlap in some case reports between UFO phenomena and, say, Bigfoot type sightings.
Mm.
There's an interesting book I've got by a chap called Stan Gordon, the UFO Bigfoot phenomenon or something like from Pennsylvania. I can't remember the precise. I'd have to look it up, but it cites cases of involving both UFO phenomena and cryptid or Bigfoot sightings
Yes.
occurring more or less at the same time. That's just one source which reports this sort of thing. So yes, I think there is a considerable overlap.
Yeah, it's very strange. And this is what, I mean, Jacques Vallée many years ago stated after doing a considerable amount of research into this phenomena that he believed the phenomena is delivering absurdity on purpose. It's like some form of psychological warfare on human perception that we can't connect the dots, that we can't work it out, that it's too extreme to believe. To have, I mean, in Chestnut Ridge, which is a location in the US, over 700 people have had reported incidents of seeing Bigfoot in association to UFOs. It's a very specific location, over 700. Um, and it's not the first time. It's happening all over the world, especially in remote locations. Ranch land phenomena, high strangeness phenomena, which encompasses the paranormal, the ufological, the cryptid as a cocktail. I think one of the big problems we have, Peter, and like you mentioned with this lady that read your book, is we had this compartmentalization between the subjects. The paranormal guys would never deal with the UFO guys, and the UFO guys would deal with the paranormal guys. And the Bigfoot guys, they're out on their own as well. So you've got all these factions which won't work together. And I think when you're trying to fully research, I mean, you can spend a lifetime in just one of these subjects, and you're still trying to figure out something doesn't add up. Where the missing pieces to work out what's going on here? Well, they might find out it's not actually in the ufological camp, it's actually in the paranormal camp. And so basically, I think the idea is to break down, that compartmentalization and just throw it out there, put it all on the table and see what fits. Because, when Steven Spielberg made his hit movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, he actually got proper case files. He wanted to be as legitimate as he could possibly be to make that movie in real cases and wanted to introduce them into the movie. And I've said to a few people, I said, "Oh, I love that movie. Did you notice the kind of poltergeist scene in it?" And they look at me puzzled. They said, "Poltergeist scene." I said, "Well, the little boy in the house, and the Hoover starts going around on its own. The taps start turning, things start unscrewing. It's poltergeist type disturbances." And when you surprisingly, there's quite a lot of people that have had those paranormal experiences after having a ufological experience. So the connection is quite strong, I think, Peter, in many cases.
Yes.
And I thought the aspect of breaking down that compartmentalization is a necessary process to be able to research, because we feel confined within the walls of our subject.
There's an area, I don't know whether you know this one, but in south central Washington state called the Yakima Indian Reservation. And that was for some years, I don't know whether it's still sort of active, but it had seemingly hosted quite a lot of strange experiences, UFO type events, Bigfoot, ghostly experiences. And there's a book I've got by a chap called Greg Long. I think it was Greg Long, the Yakima UFO Microcosm or something like that. I'd have to again check the precise title, but and he cited a lot of interesting testimony. There was one event where a person was driving along the north side of, I think it was called Toppenish Ridge, heading home, and he encountered humanoid type creatures, and he decided to give them just drive on. He was a bit disturbed by that. Then his car was seemingly followed, or vehicle, whatever it was he was driving, was followed by a light. Then he had a sense or saw a shadow to his left and intuitively knew it was a friend of his. And then it transpired, I think it must have discovered within hours or the next day, that the friend had been killed in a shooting incident at that time. So this is an incident of what could be called in psychical research terms a crisis apparition, an apparition coinciding with some kind of crisis in someone else's life. So you had in this one incident, assuming it's being correctly described, encounter with alien figures, UFO type manifestation, being followed by this light, and then a crisis apparition. So you've got these things coming from slightly different, or at least the crisis apparition is coming from a different traditional category from a typical UFO report, and yet occurring at the same time. And that case made an impression on me, as have many others that I've read, where there've been these mixed experiences. So, as you say, I think this kind of attempt to put them into separate boxes, it's almost to the point where you can imagine that. Well, not imagine, maybe it's possibly true that if you visit someone who calls in your help in regard to haunt type phenomena, they may be reluctant to tell you they've also had UFO experiences, partly because they might think that you wouldn't believe them if they're adding UFOs onto the already kind of strange subject of ghostly phenomena, but also perhaps because they think that you as an investigator wouldn't be part of your domain of interest.
Yes.
Therefore, I suggest to investigators of whether it's UFOs, Bigfoot, or ghosts, or hauntings, whatever, to ask these questions, not just ask about, how many times have you seen the apparition and that kind of thing. Have you had any strange experiences with strange animals or any lights in the sky or anything like that? And unless you ask, you may not get the reply.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
I want to ask you, Peter, about because I'm curious about your opinion in regards to the haunting phenomena. Now, it's generally thought of that it's a manageable situation to some degree because some people claim that you can go in and convince the phenomena to leave, move on, or make a change in that environment. Now, being a clinical psychologist, what's your take on that? Do you think it's a placebo that the family are changing their environment, or do you think that there is some good tangible evidence to say we can impact a change in that environment? Or some people will say, well, no, the haunting phenomena will do what it wants to do, especially if it's associated to, long-term haunting of a particular building.
Well, because of this kind of association with my job, or having been a psychologist, um, I think there's a bit of a stereotype about psychologists coming from the sort of rent-a-skeptic psychologists that you see on television, as commentators on paranormal programs. That the general public, I think, therefore tend to think that psychologist equals hardline skeptic. I remember talking to a journalist once. He phoned he was given my number by the British Psychological Society, I think, and phoned me, wanted my opinion or something, and he was a bit shocked when he discovered that I actually believe in paranormal phenomena. I think he assumed because I was a psychologist, I was a skeptic, an out and out skeptic. I mean, I'm skeptical in a way about things that you have to be in life, but I'm a cautious skeptic and not an out and out sort of dismissive one. So I think my background as a psychologist doesn't give a good indication which way I go, but my feeling is that these phenomena do occur. They're enigmatic. We don't really know exactly how they work, but at the same time, I think people probably do have an influence on the phenomena. My advice to people experiencing these phenomena, which has been in cases I've looked at, and is to try to be reassuring and tell them that that nothing's bad is likely to happen. Try and defuse tension as much as possible, calm things down. Almost be boring in the sense of being cautious, take notes,
Yeah.
and ask them to keep in touch, give me a ring if any, and I'll pop round if necessary, reassuring. But yes, I do think that there is an interaction between people and whether the phenomena and so on.
I totally agree. I do believe that some people can be kind of haunted themselves. I mean,
Yes.
They move from one location to another, and the phenomena follows, and it just keeps with them. And they've had experiences all their lives. And
In a talk I gave the other day, actually, I spoke about this a hypothetical model, and I suggested that in dealing with cases of this type, there could be two factors: one related to the place itself, and the other related to the person. And it could be a complex interaction. In reality, I suspect that if there is such a thing as a propensity to generate paranormal phenomena, it's not something that's constant. It probably varies with your health, your age, mental and physical circumstances, the
yeah,
state of your relationship with other people in the place, and so on. And it could be quite complicated. But this naive idea that it must be either person-centered or place-centered is maybe wrong, and it could lead us down the wrong, down the wrong
but
track.
I believe there could be a lot of factors that are involved. I mean, vexation seems to be at number at the top of the list there, but that can be brought on by numerous different things. I mean, if we look at poltergeist infestations, statistically, we would say, okay, well, there's usually children involved, adolescent. There might be financial issues, family issues, slightly living in poor conditions, maybe. If you read through the various poltergeist incidents that have been reported over the years, it does seem to be a somewhat of a pattern to them. And like you're saying, is that those patterns, it could be who's in that environment, whose problems, are coming into that environment because you bring the person in, you bring the problem in, and it's a combination of a number of things that happen, just at the right time, at the right place. But we only see it as sort of, well, like you say, it's a place phenomenon. It's down to the location or it's down to the individual and nothing more or less. I think you're right. I think there's um, a lot more things that are involved in regarding why certain things do take place, for sure. I think,
I remember reading years ago your bad experience. I actually felt sorry for you as I was reading the story. It was about a poltergeist case in Rochdale,
yes,
in a prefab where you were thumped in the back. Was it?
was.
And
Well,
it.
yeah, it was what was interesting is that I recognized it because I'd had been training as an electrical engineer, and I was an electrical engineer. So I did train at university, and through the process of training as an electrical engineer back then, things that might have changed since then, but back in the 90s, they would give you an electric shock, because they want you to recognize what it is, and it repels, and everybody got a little jab on this electric shot. So we all knew, okay, now we know what an electric shot's like. And when I got thumped in the back, it felt, I would say 50% of it was a physical punch, and the other 50% was like an like an electric shock, because I'm quite a big guy, and to lift me up from the bed onto a small dressing table ahead of me, I mean, I don't even remember the process of thinking how to get there. It was like an involuntary action. I couldn't help it. But at the same time of being punched. So it felt to me as an electric shock and a physical punch. Did have the mark from the physical punch, which I had for a few weeks. And I have to admit, it was very painful, like a physical punch, but the punch would not have lifted me forward as much. It just wouldn't have done. It probably wouldn't even raise me off the bed, to be honest with you. And when that happened afterwards, I thought it was like an electrical shock as well. So maybe that action does have some form of an electrical, an unusual natural electrical phenomena associated with it. Well, I have to admit, I was reasonably quite skeptic until 1995. But when that happened, and I've always been truthful about it, that my first thing to do was run. And I think it was just a survival sense that kicked in, because I just had to get out, and I did, and I did run for it. It sounds very unprofessional, but at the time, it was my only way of how trying to sort of psychologically deal with what has just happened. And then it was kind of thinking, well, I mean, I came close to coming out of the subject after that, because I was thinking to myself, wow, these things do exist. how do you protect yourself? How do you stop that from happening against something that you cannot see and you don't know if it could occur? Because I had nothing prior warning to that happening. It was just came out of the blue. And I thought to myself, well, that's a concern. That's a concern if it can do that. And I know it's a rarity, of course, but if it can, and those, and that's what its capabilities are, then that's concerning, and it did concern me at the time. And I thought, oh, should I do this? Should I carry on? But as the weeks went on, I kind of become more engrossed into how can it do that? What are the mechanics? What are the paranormal mechanics that are involved to be
So
able to?
sorry to interrupt you, Steve, but at the time it happened, you got you had this experience. Did you leave the house temporarily, or?
I ran out the door. I ran out the front door. Yeah. And I sat on the wall at the front, just trying to gather my thoughts. I did go back into the house.
Yeah.
I was the other investigators beckoned me to go back in. And I thought, that they just wanted to talk. No, they were interested. They wanted to take photographs of me back because I had a big red mark. So that's what they wanted to do. And from the physical being hit. But I ran straight out the front door. And it was a survival sense that kicked in, natural thing.
A problem I've had with cases is that this traditional idea that haunt phenomena are associated with a place and poltergeist phenomena are associated with a person, it's difficult because some cases I've investigated, I dare say it's happened to you as well. The phenomena have been temporary. Now, if you're investigating a case, say in Rochdale or somewhere like that, and you visit the people concerned, the phenomena have been going on for maybe a couple of years even, and then they cease, within say 2 months of your investigation. It's very difficult to know whether the phenomena were linked to the place or with the particular people. It's a different score if a house is being sort of a setting for phenomena, the family move out, another family moves in, and then they too report phenomena. Then you can say with greater certainty it's linked with the place. But in my experience, it is, in practice, phenomena can fizzle out, and therefore it's hard to know. And the other problem is if you say, well, are there any family tensions such as you may associate with a poltergeist case? Show me a family where there aren't some tensions. I mean,
I know exactly.
It's hard to know, and I'm actually skeptical about this division of, I think what we should do is in many cases not even bother trying to separate them, and we should just use the term recurrent paranormal activity.
Yes, I agree.
That's descriptive. It doesn't have any theoretical baggage. And the trouble with calling anything a poltergeist case or a haunting, it implies spirit agency. You may not mean that when you're describing it as such, but the word poltergeist literally means noisy spirit, and ghost, if you look up in the dictionary, it's discarnate spirit. And haunting, there's a ghost that's doing the haunting, and this sort of presupposes that there are spirits involved. Now, they may be in some cases, but in other cases it may not be to do with spirits. So I think a neutral term like recurrent paranormal activity is better than this traditional haunt thing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I do agree with that because
an interesting case,
black and white.
yeah, an interesting case on this question of poltergeist being linked with people and so on, and poltergeist phenomena. In I think it was 2007, I was in contact with someone from Bufora that we mentioned earlier, the British UFO Research Association, and this person informed me that following on from the well-known UFO incidents at Rendlesham Forest in December 1980, I think it was. The forest was attracting visitors, people who would go there at night, maybe on a weekend and so on a Saturday night. And these people were coming away from the forest with reports of, capturing odd images on their phones or on their cameras, maybe apparitional experiences, missing time, that sort of thing. And this person I was talking to was skeptical and assumed that these reports were psychosocial, based on things like suggestion and that kind of thing, which I could understand that argument. But I was curious, so I contacted one of the people involved down there, and and decided to make a visit to the area. And this informant called Brenda Butler, she was very
Oh,
helpful.
yes, I don't know, Williams.
Yeah, and I met a friend of hers called Peter Parrish who'd had experiences on it, and we went out into the forest, and on the Saturday night, I think it was, we went into the forest and met other people, and I was subsequently in touch with others. Um, and although many of the things I was told by these witnesses could be put down to psychological processes and so on, there was one phenomenon in particular which didn't seem to be easily explained, which was hot or warm stones
Yes.
falling down. People would be walking through the forest, and then a stone would drop down beside them, smooth stone. When they picked it up, it'd be hot or warm. Now, this is a manifestation that has been reported in poltergeist cases. Um, and with these witnesses, none of them was consistently present when this happened. Um, it could happen. One witness, for instance, Peter Parrish, it happened to him when he was by himself,
Yeah.
and so the likelihood that any one person was catalyzing the phenomena is a little bit hard to believe because, as I say, they weren't all present at the same time. Equally, I think it's unlikely that it was a fraudulent manifestation because for someone to, it would have entailed someone hanging around in the forest for spending an awful lot of time with a pocket full of stones and a catapult and a cigarette lighter or something to heat up the stones. So it seemed implausible. So here we had a physical poltergeist type phenomenon, not clearly associated with any given individual, possibly associated with the forest itself. The other thought that occurred to me was, are these people who are visiting the forest creating a sort of group mind effect?
Yes.
Is there a sort of um, are they doing it somehow unconsciously, doing it themselves as a collective? Another thought was that, is there some external intelligence that's playing games with them? So
Well,
a range of hypotheses. Not possible to say which one is
no,
correct.
difficult. I do know a couple of people who had those experiences of the stones falling in front of them. Both of them reported the stone come straight down, as not like it's come at an angle like a catapult, but
Yeah,
come drop straight down in front of them.
yeah,
So the whole process was to discover the stone, very much like a poltergeist action, because they're so resourceful. They don't want to throw a stone over there that you might not find. So these actions are seemingly done purposeful, and they were warm to the touch, and they will look like smooth, like beach pebbles.
yes,
That type of thing. And of course, yes, you are right. There have been incidents reported like that. There was one particular house that was pelted for weeks, wasn't it? The police were involved, pelted for weeks with these type of smooth stones. Um, it's not the first time those things have happened, but I started to look into that location and discovered, um, was it like that prior to the UFO incident at Rendlesham? Um, because I was going down the same path thinking, well, maybe the people going have made it haunted through the process of belief or something. They bore something, a bit like the Philip experiment in Ontario,
yes,
Canada. You can make a place haunted in the sense of if you believe it strongly enough, and therefore it starts to interact. However, I found that there was quite a consistent amount of UFO activity prior to 1980 at that location,
yes,
and also paranormal things. And but the root of it starts, you go back and back and back in time, that there's a lot of towns locally which are called like Elveston and and places like that. They're named after gentry, after small fairy folk. And the area was renowned for fairy folk encounters. And then obviously as time's gone on, the paranormal encounters and time's gone on, the ufological encounters. Again, it seems to string along with these various different types of phenomena that we've categorized separately, but seemingly taking place in a particular area where the incident of Rendlesham took place. In 1980. So it's again, I wonder if it's something to do with the footprint. Is there something to do with the geology of the land? Is this something that we're unaware? The magnetics of the land, positive regions, magnetic, negative regions. Or,
Interestingly, the forest itself isn't an ancient forest. It was, I
yes,
think it was planted by the Forestry Commission. Was
it
it the
was.
1920s or something? On heath and agricultural land. It wasn't an ancient forest. Another area where this kind of possible group mind effect could have played some role was Warminster. It's starting in about 1960, the very end of 1964, going on to about 1977. The area was a sort of allegedly a hotspot for UFO activity and other phenomena.
Yes.
And it's quite a controversial case. I mean, it has been suggested that a local journalist called Arthur Shuttle would was prone to exaggeration and maybe encouraged people to kind of imagine things or misinterpret phenomena. There was also a degree of hoaxing. But the phenomena weren't just confined to UFO manifestations. People used to congregate on Cradle Hill and other places in the area. And so one wonders, could, to some extent, apart from imagined phenomena and just purely psychological mechanisms, could this a group mind effect have generated some of the stuff that was going on there? I don't know. I mean, it seems to have gone quiet now. Although, of course, that area generally is still has it became famous for crop circles, the general area, and Wiltshire is one of the sort of
Yes.
prime spots in Britain for that.
I do believe consciousness has a play, and I think in everything regarding these types of varied phenomena. I mean, my first visit to Warminster, I was two. My mother and father took me to Cradle Hill. I remember sat there on a sheet on the ground. My father was very into the subject, and so there was no escape for me. But it's a fascinating location. Unfortunately, there was a hive of activity. I've reported incidents. Some of them were very unusual. Some of them were hoaxes simply through, I think, buttons thrown up in the sky and a photograph taken, and various different things, which of course caused the concern. Town meetings in regarding what they refer to as the thing, and there was some type of panic there. It's interesting though that we say, I do think that this consciousness does play into this. There was an incident that took place. Here's a perfect scenario. A TV show from Channel 4 we got in August back in the 1990s, mid 1990s, I believe it was, and wanted to do a TV show about crop circles. So they hired a gentleman who I know called Matthew Williams, who creates crop circles, and I have to admit he's incredible. I've seen him, what he's done. He does, and he even does the weaved ones. And to see them, they look something so profound. You'd swear that it's got to be something, paranormal or supernatural in nature. However, he creates them. So the TV show brought a couple of researchers over from the US and the science team, and they paid a farmer some money to allow them to create a crop circle in his field for this TV show. So what the scientists did before we went out there and created this TV show, they went out there into the field, and it was just wheat, and they took readings and different types of equipment, and they got nothing unusual whatsoever. It was all normal. And then they asked Matthew to go in and create this crop circle. So Matthew goes in and creates this crop circle, and I admit it's incredible what he does. And after an hour or so, it's finished. Surprisingly, you'd think something that takes such a long length of time doesn't necessarily. And it's all about mathematics, most of it, really, and a keen eyesight and using a couple of basic pieces of equipment. And he's done. Now, that science team went back into that crop circle and got anomalous readings across all their equipment. Now, it's just been manufactured by hand. So why are they getting very unusual readings on their equipment? They couldn't work it out. It's the same type of readings that they've found before in some of the other crop circles occasionally. And it was there filmed and watched as it was created, and yet it left some form of trace evidence behind of something. Now I'm thinking to myself, is it consciousness and the geology of the land that we're tied to somehow that creates these unusualities that these meters are picking up? Because it shouldn't have done, to be honest with you. That just shouldn't take place. And yet it happened, and it was a Channel 4 television show. And it was they were really surprised, actually. They didn't expect to have any anomalous readings on their equipment afterwards. But when it comes to these sort of tests, I mean, we've got to try and move forward, try and advance the subject in the research of paranormal. I study areas. I have to break it down because the word paranormal is massive. The subject's massive. I have to break it all down to paranormal mechanics. That's what I like to specialize in. How does it do what it does? And I've done a considerable amount of research in instrumental transcommunication. And back in 2009, I was part of a number of experiments which were incredible, all with the things that were being witnessed. And the communications with vocals, sounding voices, which were neither male, neither female. When recorded, they would sound to the human ear like it's a voice, a normal human voice, but the frequencies that come back are not of human vocals. So they don't have these human vocals. So it's like artificially generated sound to sound like human voice, which we hear, but the recording devices don't register it as human vocals. So I thought, okay, so this is a generated action. To us to hear it, though, we would not know without equipment. Now, we ended up being sponsored by Olympus, and we had Olympus engineers coming with 3 devices. These 3 devices are specific to all 3 the same, identical models of recording devices. And in a silent environment, in front of all experimenters, all 3 devices were put on to record, only for about 20 seconds. And we just prior to record, we asked for a response. After 20 seconds, of course, the Olympus engineers not expecting to hear anything on these devices. We press play on the first device, and you could hear clearly a male voice. And on the second device, you could hear a female voice. And on the third device, what we got is pops and clicks, but we don't even know what the pops and clicks were, to be honest with you. They're a little unusual. Well, they scratched their head at that because they thought, well, we didn't hear anything. So how's it happening? So, of course, the recording devices are designed, like most recording devices, to record human vocals, harmonics, 20 hertz, 20,000 hertz. They're not designed to be out much that range because we wouldn't hear them anyway. So they'd be pointless manufacturing for that specific thing. All the same devices, though, which is very interesting. Now, this is where it started to get very interesting, is because after doing that particular test, we had a number of incidents where we heard them, and the experimenters heard the same thing. We wrote it down. We all heard the same thing. The recording devices didn't record any of them. So we thought, well, how are we hearing this? All of us, the same words being spoken. We were assuming it's a direct voice phenomena, but it couldn't be recorded by the equipment. So how are we hearing it? And then it kind of dawned on us what the phenomenon is seemingly targeting the devices. On this device, I'll have a female voice. On this device, I'll have a male voice. And this one, they'll have this, that, and the other. The group sitters, the experimenters, are also pieces of equipment. So they targeted us and we hear different things. And that led us to think when people are reporting, I just heard my mother's voice call me from over my shoulder and nobody else hears it. Are they really hearing it or not hearing it? It becomes a problem. So we didn't have a name for this. So we devised the name of Transplacement because it's transplaced to these people. It's like it's targets equipment, targets individual people. And there's been tests where pieces of equipment have been utilized. And like an old cassette in an old cassette recorder, the old 80s ones with big buttons that you press down. And you pull the power cord out and the tape cassette's not going round. And yet, when you take that out and put it in a player and you play it, you can hear vocals on it. And yet, how could it have recorded it? Because it wasn't going around. Even the recording head was taken out, and it was still, without even going around, managed to put vocals on it. So they target the cassette. In fact, we might not have even needed the recorder. We could just get rid of the recorder, put the cassette tape on the table, and things like that with Bacchi, the gentleman from, I think it was Italian, wasn't he, or French, and particular radios he was communicating with, and specialists came in and put it in a big Faraday cage. Nothing's going to get through, and of course it didn't stop them. They went in and physically took out the tubes out the radio, and it still worked. It still didn't stop it. So the limitations and the capabilities, we're trying to work out about this phenomenon. And it's easy to misinterpret. It's easy to say, well, it must be happening in this way. But when it suddenly reverses, and that you're hearing these with the experimenters, and the equipment's not recording it, then it's not harmonic. So how are we hearing it? And it was assumed that it's got to, because there's no harmonics, so the eardrum's not vibrating, so it must be happening probably in the inner ear, and that is transplaced to us on our inner ear and causes the vibrations and liquids to the crystals, and is to interpreted into the brain, into language, and we hear it. It's a very, very tricky area, but it's a fascinating area, which is just paranormal mechanics. How does it do what it does? And I have to say, the most significant discovery was in 2013 for me, during a long session of seances, which were very conditioned. It took 7 months to get the right people to be part of this team of individuals to take part in the seance. It seemed, strange enough, through test procedures, that the phenomena seemingly like the believers and not the skeptics. And I was thinking to myself, well, it's like people who maybe have belief, faith apparitions. If you don't believe, would you have a faith apparition? So is it the other way around? Maybe believing is seeing, as opposed to seeing is believing in some cases. And in fact, we finally fine-tune where we're getting the best results from the right people. They turn all out to be believers and had experiences, funny enough. I thought, okay. So once we pushed forward, we started with the old vocals from people claiming to be spirits and things like that, the usual. We pushed through that, and we started to have little bits of poltergeist disturbances taking place, things moving around. We pushed through further than that, and there was some other form of communication with intelligences that didn't seem, strangely enough, to be spirit. They seemed to be something else. Now, there's big question marks. What is the something else? What are these non-human intelligences? What are they? We don't know. But through direct voice phenomena, we built up, and it was quite good, because it ended up like a telephone line that you don't put the phone down, because you don't have to go back to the next session and reestablish it all. It was straight there again, so that was quite interesting. I don't know. Have you considered quantum mechanics as part of an association, Peter, with the paranormal and some of these things?
Yes, I'm aware of quantum mechanics, but not an expert on it by a long chalk. But I think it's been said that there is a tendency for people interested in the paranormal to maybe some of those people to have a misunderstanding of quantum mechanics. For instance, it's often said that something that talking of the so-called Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, that the phenomenon, whether a thing is X or Y, is determined at the point of observation. Now, people might think observation means consciousness and someone studying the phenomenon at that time, but I think what physicists mean by observation is it could be an instrumental reading. It's not necessarily someone at that point, literally watching the dial. And therefore, there may be a tendency for people to misuse some of these concepts or misunderstand them. But yes, it's the other thing about quantum mechanics is that because it's a bit sort of mysterious, there may be a tendency to look for explanations within that area because it sounds respectable.
Yes.
You know, it sounds, oh, it's hard science, quantum mechanics, you know, and therefore, you know, if we can sort of link it up with that, it's almost like giving credit to someone because they've got a doctorate in physics.
Yes.
When they're talking about something such as maybe an investigation of a haunting case, they may be less, you know, qualified than someone who doesn't have any qualifications. You know, that person may be just as good or better. Um, um, and so, yes, quantum mechanics is interesting.
I do think, yeah. I mean, it was interesting when I learnt about some years ago about the double slit experiment,
That's
and
right. Yes.
and of course, when my mind immediately went to poltergeist projectiles. Most of them I've seen in flight. When I truly sit down and ask these people, did you see it leave its resting place? The answer is normally no. And there was occasion when I was in Yorkshire on a poltergeist case, and I was interviewing with two other researchers, interviewing the lady, the witness, about her experiences, which were quite prominent, regular, high severity, high frequency case. And something caught my eye, aerial vision of a chair. There was a chair to my left, and it had a cushion on it. And I realised then that I'm looking at the other investigators, and they're looking. So something caught their eye. I don't know if it was movement, whatever, but it was seemingly the cushion. We thought the cushion had moved. So we're looking at the cushion, and we're kind of waiting, urgent, is it going to happen? Because nothing happens. So we went back to talking to the witness, and about a minute or so later, the thing flew across the room, straight across. And I started to think, I wonder if could we have a situation where we're stopping the action from happening because of our observation of it? I'm just curious, I mean, the good thing is about paranormal mechanics, you can start to get into all sorts of different things, but there's a lots more we can really get into studying when we start getting into these things. But the problem is that most of the time, these experiments take such a long time to be able to get to that level, and not always does it happen. It's only happened twice in my 41 years now. Twice it's only ever happened. So yes, I know they have a capability to do certain things beyond the norm, but the opportunity to witness that firsthand is usually very, very slim. I mean, I guess the skull experiment probably did manage to get some details, and some things take place, but it's what it takes. And like you said, I think it's a consistent amount. It's who's involved. Is it fine tune the right people, they're on the right frequency or mindset? I don't know. But what we did find is that the experiments work better. And I didn't want that, because I wanted skeptics to go in. That's what I want to do. I want to bench test the phenomenon as much as I can. But it wouldn't work. Seemingly the phenomenon likes the believers. It's strangely enough. There's something that I've realized over 41 years is that reality as we know it is not what we really think it is. It's so
Yeah.
much more. And the multiple serendipities and profound coincidences in association to our interests, is always poking its head in, just to taunt us, just to say, well, do you know what? You won't think this one's a rational explanation, will you? And things like that. And it's become quite a commonality throughout over the years of research of it rearing its face, and and doing these little things, which just on purpose for you to recognize and go, yeah, that's not normal, you know. And I think that it kind of goes hand in hand. I mean, I think some people are kind of geared to go into this subject. I don't know why. Um, but the communications from instrumental transcommunication, basically the information that they give, sometimes they've given details about future events, which have been absolutely right. We've got 6 logged ones. The longest one was 19 months, just over 19 months, and absolutely correct. I mean, very specific information. So what's the situation regarding time and these communications with these intelligence?
I've got a slight sort of query about, not query, but uncertainty regarding the use of equipment. You've probably seen some of these recent shows on the Skinwalker Ranch, where there
Oh,
was a team of people, starting the ranch, and it's very heavy on use of equipment.
yes.
Um, and I've no criticism of that at all, but my query is if abnormalities are detected, are these abnormalities something that are actually out there, or is it just the phenomenon interacting with the equipment?
Yeah, exactly.
So if you go in there with I don't know, a Geiger counter and you pick up the evidence of gamma rays, is the equipment being messed with, or are gamma rays really, So
That's a
it's
real problem.
yes,
We don't know. That's the problem. I
because you
mean,
hear time and again, don't you, of equipment failing when people are
oh
conducting
yes.
investigations,
I mean, I've had a lot of them.
batteries draining and that
Yeah,
kind of thing.
that does happen. Battery drainage, and you take those batteries home and check them at home, and they're still dead. So the effect of drawing energy from batteries seemingly is in excess of the battery drainage the equipment could use in a given length of time. So yes, that does have. I've done TV shows, and the film crew have lost all the batteries. They've all gone down, and they've had to go and get new guys and new equipment and stuff. To so occasionally that can happen. It's a profound phenomenon. I don't understand it, how that drainage can happen so fast. But you are right, because is it the equipment being affected, or is the equipment doing its job, and there's something in the environment, that's adversely being picked up by the equipment. Now the problem for us is that human beings seem to be the most limited creature on the planet in regarding our sensory abilities. I mean, insects and animals can see, hear, and everything better than us, and demonstrated that many times. It's like we're perfectly designed, the modern human being, because I'm sure our ancestors, we know our ancient ancestors were better and that were capable of hearing and all sorts of things because of the way they built things on certain, they must have felt energies. They could feel certain energies where they built places, ancient sites, possibly even the range of hearing would have been different in regarding infrasonic sound, things like that. So we seemingly lost touch with ourselves, but we are perfectly designed for the phenomena to be around us and us be ignorant of it and not being able. It's like the perfect thing designed, so that they can be hide from our perceptions. And we have to become reliant on sometimes equipment to help us, try and look into those areas which supersedes, our capabilities. One of those things that we have now is a time displacement meter, DT meter, and where phenomenon is seemingly been active or manifests or reports of this. Occasionally, we get something of referred to as latency I don't know if it's down to a gravitational well that happens, but it's like it's only microseconds, but you shouldn't have latencies taking place unless miniature black holes exist. You know,
I get the impression that some people with equipment have they exhibit what I'd call equipmentophilia, where they love using equipment to such a degree that they their attachment to sort of in paranormal case investigation using equipment, it's more of an opportunity to use the equipment
oh
than
yeah,
it is because they're interested in the phenomena.
yes,
You know,
you are right, absolutely.
yes,
I've always said the best piece of equipment is yourself. I've said
yeah.
this to so many people. There was not really many good pieces of equipment. Most of them are designed to give a paranormal response, which is usually just toys and flashing lights. But I think the best piece of equipment, and not just myself, but my colleague who also works on me with these particular studies, he said the same thing. The skin, on our bodies is a good reaction to environment. It can react. You have that feelings of sensations, the goosebumps and the hairs go up. That fight or flight kicks in. The body's telling you might be something there, but just because you can't see it or hear it doesn't mean it's not there. Like that old warning mechanisms kicking in. I think people need to, react to that a little bit more, or at least understand it. But they're living in an environment now, Peter, that, you know, refined sugar is everywhere, and that causes adrenal weakness. So we're not getting the full fight or flight responses as the human body should, sensory situation system is because it's dulled down, because most people are going out and doing these investigations are chewing chocolate and candy bars and drinking Coca-Cola and filling themselves with refined sugar, which brings causes adrenal weakness. So that their own body is being nullified from being a receptor, and I think the body can be quite tuned. When I go out and do investigations, I don't have anything for 72 hours refined sugar. I try and purge my body of it, because it is a poison at the end of the day. It's an addictive one as well. But it's only refined sugar, though. And I've noticed when I've been out in there that my senses seem to be sharper. Certainly, you get to realize about how you feel is an important issue. It's better than any piece of equipment that could tell you that. And act upon it. I've always said to act upon that. If you have a certain feeling you don't think you should be there, well, don't be there. It's sometimes, sometimes it feels like maybe we do overstay our welcome in certain places. Who knows? Or maybe they just don't want us there, because a lot of this phenomenon is remote. That's a reason why, probably because it doesn't want us around, And I think sometimes we go traipsing in with all these gadgets and all sorts of things, and I watched the Skinwalker Ranch TV show, and I'll be honest with you, I have many, many questions about some of the things that they've captured and the frequencies. The 1.6, gigahertz is a well-known frequency. It's used in Wi-Fi and all sorts of things, and strange things that they capture. It looks like a satellite, looks like a bug. I mean, it's entertainment at the end of the day, and I get that because I've done a lot of TV shows myself. And you can't deliver a paranormal TV show of any sort without that, really, because it's, because TV shows, what they do, because I've been involved in them, they say, right, okay, let's plan out the next 6 episodes. Well, how can you plan it out? You don't know what's going to happen. Oh, well, they do, because they're going to tell you. And this is the problem that we have. Now, don't get me wrong, you might get some occurrences happen if you're in a location, but 9 times out of 10 TV shows, the demand on a television episode's got to have something happen. Can't have an empty episode. So it's a high demand.
I notice also there's a cult of celebrity. If imagine you or I have written a good comprehensive chapter on a case, such as maybe just for the sake of argument, let's say the Rochdale poltergeist case. If a program occurs on television and maybe some well-known personality is comparing it, you'll get massive viewing, numbers. But if you appear, it will be.
I don't want that. It's the entertainment factor. I mean, it's got to be wrapped up in entertainment, but it is misleading people. It misleads people that all paranormal phenomena is terrible and it's all bad and and that's the Hollywood. It does that for us. It's just this is the problem with it. I mean, we try our best to fit these into certain areas of research, but at the end of the day, considering that we've been at this in paranormal research for over 100 years now, that it's hard to gain forward, because one thing that's seemingly found is that the paranormal phenomena sometimes won't act on cue.
No.
And it won't allow itself to be tested under the scrutiny of scientific laboratories sometimes. You just can't. And it's not a phenomenon you want to take home to meet your mother and father. It's evading and teasing and demonstrative sometimes, but at a time when you think, oh, I need this to happen as a regularity, and you won't get it, because science means you've got to bench test it, replicatable, under controlled environments. The problem is, and I had this discussion with some of the psychologists at Hosler Parapsychology Unit, that a middle ground needs to be created between the experiences that are having out there in the world and the science lab. Something in between needs to be put together so that it's not got the rigor of the scientific establishment, it's a little bit loose, but can gather really good data in regarding experimental research.
I've sometimes expressed the view, maybe more in private than in public, that I sometimes wonder whether people in university parapsychology departments are too isolated and deliberately so they'd rather use maybe unselected university students as subjects rather than test people out in the field who maybe have a track record of apparent paranormal activity. I'll give you an example. Some years ago, I was in touch with a woman in Northamptonshire who reported a whole plethora of unusual experiences. They haunt type phenomena and other things. And I visited the woman. I was corresponding. She was very pleasant. She was generous with her time. And I wrote to a local parapsychologist, someone at the university, and I said, "Look, this woman is reporting X, Y, and Z, and I wonder whether it should be useful. It would be useful to test her under laboratory conditions." I didn't even get a reply.
No.
Not even a reply. I mean, that's she. It struck me as poor. Poor show. And is that sort of, if I were a parapsychologist at a place like that, and someone said to me, "Well, this chap Steve Mera I've been meeting, he's reported a whole range of unusual experiences. He seems a credible person." I would think, let's get this guy along to the lab. I mean, rather than me doing endless experiments with people who don't score very highly on psi, very marginal effects, let's at least give it a shot. But not to even get a reply, it struck
No,
me as very, very, very disappointing.
sometimes it seems that a bridge needs to be built a little bit more upon between the general public and the parapsychological departments. Because
Yes.
like say nobody comes and knocks on our door, and I think to myself, well, why not? Because they come they knock on my door. Why are they not knocking on your door? I mean, you need to be a bit more public, seen to be helpful, seen to be interested, interact with these people, because the experiencers, most credible things that are taking place aren't happening in the science labs, unfortunately.
Yes.
They're happening outside in the field.
Yeah.
I understand that they can't just go into the field and investigate them because they lose all the scientific readiness of the experiments, the conditioning of the environment and that sort of thing. But
Well, to be honest, I don't want to sound too cynical, but I suspect in some cases with these people at the universities, they're more interested in establishing their credentials as a member of the science club than they are in the phenomena themselves.
well, that's a shame because really, the advancing the subject, we could have been so much. I've got a hunger to try and advance the subject.
Well, I mean, you actually deserve an award because, I mean, you went to the United States, to the West Coast of the United States on two occasions in looking at the Bothell House case. Now, I presume you went at your own expense as well, did you?
Yes.
And so you did this, and that showed real kind of investigative zeal and a willing to move your backside, to do some investigation. And so you've got my respect there because
Thank you, Peter.
you've done that. Yes.
I have a fascination for this, and when you go on to an investigation, you don't know what you're going to experience. Most of the time, it's usually nothing. Most of the time, it doesn't happen once you're there. But just occasionally, you see something that changes your life, and when you do that, you end up have even more questions. It always produces more questions than answers, and there isn't really got. You get to a point where, well, paranormal researchers out there in the scientific communities can't help me because even though that we are interested in the same things, we like living two different parts of lives. This what I'm dealing with and what they're dealing with is two completely different things, and yet associated. I can't have those discussions with them because, well, I mean, I have had, but I mean, last time I had a discussion about, you know, putting some ideas about new research put forward, and he said, "Oh no, we're too busy. We've got lots of work on." I said, "Well, what are you doing at the moment?" I said, "Oh, well, we've got all those old cases from 30 years ago, and we're re-going through them of ESP tests and experiments that we've done, on dreams and sleep and things like that from 30 years ago. And we're going through it to see if there's any change in current. And I thought to myself, God, blimey, I'd rather spend my time taking steps forward than going back and researching about the stuff from behind, because the phenomena seems to evolve to
Yeah.
something. Because it's intelligent and evolves with us, it's moving. So
Another thing that I don't know if you've noticed this, but quite a lot of the research done under the kind of general rubric of parapsychology is on things like paranormal belief, the relation between this and this relation between transliminality and paranormal belief, a comparative study, and it's not really about phenomena themselves. It's almost bordering on anomalistic psychology.
But like I say, Peter, we tend to, sometimes we're always chasing our tail. Sometimes we do get a little nugget now and again. It's as if the phenomena feels sorry for ourselves and just throws us something
Yes.
again, you know. But unfortunately, Peter, we've run out of time.
Yes.
Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed our chat this evening, and managed to actually go through quite a lot. And it's surprising, a lot of people do have a real strong interest in the paranormal, but they're crying out for more. They're crying out, what else is there? It can't just be TV shows. What else is there? Can't just be going out for a weekend for a haunted house visit. What is there? And it's a shame, really, because there's not a lot for them in that massive void between the TV shows and the entertainment and the universities. And that's where it's always been lacking a little bit for me. But what I am going to do, Peter, and for anybody listening, I'm going to be placing all Peter's links in under the description of our video in regards to Peter's books and where to get hold of them. And Peter, do you operate your own website for your books?
No, I don't. I don't know.
No, so they're just like an Amazon and place.
Yes.
I know you've got some links here that I can put in, and also, Peter, where can you find any of the papers that you've wrote?
I did send you a few. Just
Yes, I've got a listing of the papers you've
yes,
wrote.
yeah, just a few. I just gave you a few recent ones. Yes, yeah.
Right. And where do people find them to read them?
Well, if in the books there's reference to some of
right.
or even if you look me up on the internet or something, you can probably find. Yes, but yes,
we can do that. We can put all the links in to Peter's books, details, and some of the papers which regarding what Peter's written, and any links to information that we can find out on Peter on the internet website or things like that. Thank you again for coming on, Peter. It's been
not at all.
And let's hope that we can get back together again soon and have another chat.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.